UFC Fight Night Oklahoma City is just about here, which means going down in the main event, which means that we got Dricus Du Plessis versus Kamaru Usman. And I'm excited for this, man. I'm really, really excited for this fight because this is a big one, right? Kamaru Usman, basically in the twilight of his career. Let's just call it what it is. His run at 170, it's over. He's looking around the weight class going, the hell with that. Almost 40 years of age, Prates, Morales, Gary. I'm good. I'm gonna go up to 185, try to deal with some, hey man, there's some killers at 185 too, but I feel like this is an interesting fight because Dricus Du Plessis, being a former champion, got absolutely dominated by Khamzat Chimaev, and both guys are coming into this fight with a big point to prove. Kamaru Usman, in my opinion, picked out DDP because he looks at him as a guy who has zero defensive grappling, especially when it comes to the wrestling. And Usman's like, wait a minute. I had a competitive fight with Khamzat, so I'm going to go out here and I'm going to do what Khamzat did to DDP, and then I'm going to get myself in position to fight Sean Strickland in a rematch for the belt. Or if Khamzat is able to get the belt back or whatever, look, Usman's got history with two of the top dogs at 185 pounds. He's later in his career. He's almost 40 years of age. This, in my opinion, is the last run for Kamaru. He's got an incredible legacy at welterweight. I think he's the second greatest welterweight of all time behind the great George St. Pierre. Imagine if he can go out here and beat DDP and find a way to get his hands on the 185-pound strap. It'd be incredible for his legacy. But DDP, to me, is coming in with a big point to prove. And to me, the bigger questions are around Dricus coming into this fight, considering what we just saw happen to him almost a year ago in Chicago against Khamzat Chimaev, to where he didn't just lose. He got absolutely embarrassed. He got absolutely dominated and got punked in the grappling. So we got questions about Dricus. Is Kamaru going to come out here and do the same thing? Has DDP in the time away patched up some of these holes with the takedown defense, with the ability to get back to his feet? We are going to find, brother, we're going to find out Saturday night. Pulling a Max Holloway. Because we are going to find out Saturday night. And I want to break down this matchup. I want to talk about how I can see Kamaru Usman getting the job done, what I think we're going to see from him come fight night, and then also we will do the same for Dricus Du Plessis, and then I will give you my prediction for this fight because I think this is a big one. Because if DDP, being a former champion, having 2 victories over the current champion, Sean Strickland, like he goes out here and puts on a great performance against Kamaru, like he is right back in the conversation for possibly getting another title shot depending on how the division plays out. So big fight, excited for it. Let's talk about this matchup, man, because when you talk about Kamaru Usman, right, we know that he is one of, whether you think he's the second greatest, you think he's the best, whatever, he's one of the greatest welterweights of all time, and I think one of the all-time great fighters. And what's fascinating about this matchup is we've already seen Kamaru at 185 pounds before. Now, granted, it was on very short notice against Khamzat Chimaev. And what happened in that fight was Khamzat absolutely dominated him in round 1. Khamzat almost submitted him, but Kamaru was able to survive. I think Khamzat injured his hand or something, and regardless of what happened there, Usman put up a much better fight against Khamzat than what DDP did. And I know MMA math styles make fights, but we're going to see a full camp Kamaru Usman coming into this fight to where he is completely committed to the move to middleweight. I don't imagine we see him back at welterweight. So what's Kamaru going to look like? Is he going to look bigger and stronger than ever? I think that there's a real possibility there. What's his cardio going to look like? Because what we saw in the Buckley fight, as the fight started to play out, it looked to me like he started to slow down just a little bit in those later rounds, which I believe a lot of that was the fact that he came in with a grapple-heavy game plan. So that's going to be something to keep our eye on because I think he's going to do very much of the same coming into this fight. And what we've seen from DDP at 185 pounds, I mean, it's the Looney Tunes. It's an absolute treat to watch Dricus Du Plessis fight, man, because this dude's fighting on some roller skates. He's charging forward like Superman, ducking and chucking, throwing these big winging shots. And the thing about Dricus, there is zero quitting this dude. He is going to fight hard for 25 minutes, regardless of being dominated by Khamzat. He was battling till the very end and started to have some moments very, very late in the fight, but it was too late. So you got the girth, You got the grit of DDP mixed with the Looney Tunes style of striking versus a very technical Kamaru Usman, who is one of the greatest welterweights of all time. I can't wait for this matchup, man. So let's talk about Kamaru Usman in this fight, because Kamaru throughout his career, right, 21-4, 9 wins by KO, 1 submission, 3 first-round finishes. I don't know who the hell Kamaru Usman submitted, but that person should be ashamed of themselves, because Kamaru Usman is almost next to no submission threat. Now watch him break out some sort of something that he's been working on and watch him submit DDP. But what we've seen from Kamaru throughout his career is he's predominantly a boxer. He's mixed in some kicks as well, but he's really a wrestler at heart. But through the past several years, right, we know he's got the wobbly knees. The knees have been a little bit of a problem. He tells us to stop talking about it, but the reality is, I think it's a problem. Right? Dude's tripping and stumbling and bumbling over his knees. Right, Bilal Muhammad's out here saying he can't even run. So Kamaru Usman's knees, like, it is a concern, man. But having said that, he just went in there against Joaquin Buckley, and Buckley had zero answers early in the fight for Kamaru's wrestling. And Kamaru was shooting some great takedowns against Buckley, right? If you go back and watch that fight, he was diving in for some of these takedowns. Arms extended, reaching for the double leg, right? Getting to the single. And we've seen Kamaru Usman, he's got a good double leg, not as good as Khamzat, but he's got a very good single leg as well. And Kamaru is one of these guys that does great work by pushing you up against the fence. And what we saw earlier in the career of Usman, he leaned a lot on the wrestling, to where towards the later part of his career, right, the Masvidal fights, we saw it a little bit more, especially in the first Jorge Masvidal fight. We saw it a little bit in the second. The Colby Covington fights, the wrestling kind of canceled out. We got back and forth striking battles, right? We kind of saw him get a little bit away from the wrestling, style, to where he was implementing a lot more boxing, a lot more striking. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with, one, being around Henry Hooft, one of the best striking minds in the game, but also with the Gilbert Burns fight, right? He went and started training with Trevor Whitman, and we saw in that fight how crispy the jab was of Kamaru Usman. I think that that's going to be a big weapon for him in this fight, because when you take a look at the Joaquin Buckley fight, I think it's a great fight to kind of draw some comparisons to how I feel like Kamaru is going to approach this fight. Because for the first, I'd say 4 rounds, Kamaru was implementing a perfect game. He was jabbing, he was jabbing, he was utilizing good footwork, he was angling off, and he was doing his best to not just be a stationary target sitting in front of a young, explosive, peekaboo style of striker like Joaquin Buckley. And I know, given what Sean Brady just did to Joaquin Buckley, it kind of dampens the win that Usman had per se. But having said that, Brady's a legit grappler, and he's a much more dangerous submission threat than Kamaru Usman. And styles make fights, but the reality is, when Kamaru beat Buckley in the fashion that we saw, it was like, wow, Usman, man, he's back. Should he get a title shot? Like, people were talking about that. But then we saw Sean Brady do what he did to Buckley, and it's like, we're just kind of realizing Buckley has some serious holes with the takedown defense and the ability to get back to the feet. But Kamaru was fighting a great fight. He was sticking and moving, fighting behind the jab. He's got a very good straight right hand. And we saw him mix in the takedowns. When Buckley would come kind of, bobbing and weaving and springing into shots moving forward, those were great opportunities for Usman to run him into the jab, run him into the right hand, jab him to the body, and then eventually set up those takedowns to where Usman was doing a very, very good job of getting to the takedowns, right? We could talk about the wobbly knees, but he was shooting some explosive takedowns in that fight against Buckley. And the thing about Usman is he doesn't have the best control when he takes guys down, right? The difference here is Khamzat is a much more complete all-around grappler to me than Usman. And Khamzat's in the prime of his career, right? I think he's more explosive than Kamaru. But technically speaking, when it comes to the wrestling, Usman is incredible. And he's close to the level, I'd say, of Chimaev when it comes to straight wrestling. But the reality is he doesn't have the same kind of control. And we saw that in the Buckley fight. We saw in the later parts of the fight to where I feel like that was a factor, was Usman hadn't been grappling so heavy in his most recent fights, to where having so much success with the grappling, it was great, but I feel like we started to see him slow down. We saw him landing some good ground and pound. We saw him controlling Buckley on the deck. So if he's going to beat Dricus Du Plessis, I feel like that's what we're going to see from Kamaru Usman. We are going to see a very grapple-heavy game plan. We're going to see Kamaru come into this fight looking to utilize really good angles, fighting behind the jab. But the biggest thing is, Dricus Du Plessis fought Sean Strickland twice. So DDP has had 2 camps preparing for what I think is the best jab in the sport in Sean Strickland. So he has a formula of how to deal with the jab. Now, I will say this. I think Usman does a better job than Strickland when it comes to mixing up the jab with the levels, right? Throwing it up high, throwing it to the body, letting the right hand follow to the body. Like Strickland does a very good job jabbing upstairs, but a lot of it is he kind of headhunts with it, and then he uses the teeps and knees to the body to where Usman really brings the boxing with the straight shots to the body. And I feel like a guy like DDP that's so Looney Tune-ish, right? He holds up the high guard, comes running into range. That's where Kamaru can just kind of just run him into those straight shots, run him into the jab, use that forward momentum that Dricus is moving forward with to time a good 1-2 down the pipe. And we've seen that, listen, Kamaru has some serious power when he sits on a shot, man. We saw him drop in Gilbert Burns with jabs. We saw him drop in Colby Burns. We saw him drop in Colby Covington with straight shots, right? We saw him knock out Masvidal with a beautiful straight right hand. So it's safe to say that Usman, from working with Trevor Whitman, like his straight punches and the boxing specifically, it's went to another level. And I know his defense isn't particularly great on the feet. He's very vulnerable to kicks to the legs, kicks to the body. Right? Leon Edwards kind of terrorized him with the inside leg kick, ripping him to the body, and eventually setting up a high kick, which did KO Kamaru Usman, obviously, right? We all remember that vintage KO from Leon Edwards. It was incredible. But Kamaru Usman's a dang good fighter, and I know he's almost 40 years of age, but he absolutely has the style to go out here and beat Dricus Du Plessis. I think it comes down to having a disciplined, strategic approach. And Trevor Whitman, he's been backing up why he's one of the best coaches in the game. Look what Justin Gaethje just did to Ilia Topuria. Look how beautiful Justin Gaethje fought. Look at the game plan. Like, you could tell that was a well-orchestrated plan that they had dialed up. So if you don't think that Trevor Whitman and Usman are not going to come into this fight with some sort of, very methodical game plan that they're going to follow, like, I think it's going to be very similar to the Buckley fight. That's what they're going to look to do. Usman is watching what Khamzat did to DDP, and he's sitting back going, I think I can do the same thing. Now, can he do the same thing? That's yet to be seen. I don't think Usman is on the level of a Khamzat Chimaev, considering Khamzat is in his prime, and I think Khamzat is a more well-rounded grappler in terms of having a legit submission threat, to where Kamaru Usman, from what we've seen throughout most of his career, other than one time, he really isn't a submission threat. But the craziest thing about Usman, before we start talking about DDP, people tend to forget about this win. People forget, man, but a long, long time ago, many moons ago, Kamaru Usman was able to beat Sean Strickland back in 2017. And what he did to Strickland, I mean, obviously, I think middleweight Strickland at this point in time is way better than the Sean Strickland back then. And I don't know that Usman is necessarily better than what he was at this point. But man, this was impressive by Usman, because he took down Strickland a couple times, but he didn't have too much success with the wrestling. It was really the striking and the forward pressure and the way that he was cutting off Sean and just pressuring him and landing big shots. He hurt Strickland bad. Right, so Kamaru Usman is one of these guys. We've seen him go in there with really, really good welterweights. We've seen him absolutely terrorize Tyron Woodley, who's a very good wrestler with a ton of power. We saw what he did to RDA. Like, we've seen Usman in there with some very dynamic styles of opponent at 170 pounds. So I think that him coming up against Dricus Du Plessis, now is the time for Usman to move to middleweight. I feel like fighting behind the jab, throwing it up high, throwing it to the body, and letting him run into that jab and that right hand is going to be paramount for Usman in this fight, and getting to the takedowns. Because one of the big things about DDP, I look at him as like he's like a bad storm. He's like a tornado and a hurricane that's coming. What I mean by bad storm is, you know that the storm is coming, and you know what the storm brings, but it's unpredictable. You know that there's going to be a ton of rain. You know that there's going to be dangerous winds, and it's going to be spooky out there. You know what's coming, but you don't know at the specific time of when it's going to strike. And the best thing to do is just get out of Dodge. Don't be there when the storm strikes. You don't want to have to worry about how bad the storm is when it's there. And that's what Khamzat was able to do to DDP. He said, man, screw this storm. I'm going to take him down, neutralize him on the deck, and I'm not going to worry about that Looney Tune stuff on the feet. Because while Usman has fought, I'd say, a lot more technical fighters than Dricus, that element of chaos and unpredictability that DDP brings to the table is very, very dangerous. And coming into this fight, Dricus, to me, is the biggest, the strongest, and the most hard-hitting opponent that Kamaru has had to fight in his career. So I can't wait to see how Kamaru deals with Dricus Du Plessis, because the reach is going to be matched in this fight. They both have a 76-inch reach. Kamaru, to me, is not going to be outgunned, in terms of the physicality. I do expect DDP to be a little bit stronger, but I feel like angles are going to be a big part of Kamaru's game coming into this fight, and fighting behind the jab. We've seen him switch stances. He can go orthodox. He can go southpaw, and running DDP into the jab. Because one of the things about Dricus' style, what makes him awkward, what makes him unpredictable, he charges into range with that blitz. And when he decides to go, he fully commits. right? To where if he lands a big shot, it can definitely hurt you. But those are the times where you can run him into those shots. And also, he gives you his hips to where that can help Kamaru duck underneath and find a takedown. So for me, Usman fighting behind the jab, eventually getting the right hand going. Usman doesn't do a very good job slugging in the pocket. He kind of just squints, ducks, and chucks these weird noodly uppercuts and hooks. It doesn't look particularly good. It's the straight punches of Usman on the feet with the kicks to the body, and he does mix in some good leg kicks as well, fighting behind the straight shots, getting the takedowns going, and testing the grappling of DDP. Because in my opinion, while I think DDP has improved in the time away, I don't know that he has improved leaps and bounds since we saw him last against Khamzat Chimaev. But the question is, can Kamaru do some of the things that Khamzat was able to do for an extended period of time, considering that this is a 25-minute fight? But Kamaru absolutely has all the skills to go out here and get this done against Dricus Du Plessis. Now, when we talk about DDP, this is a guy that's 23-3 in his career, right? 9 wins by KO, 11 wins by submission, and 8 first-round finishes. And I know when you go 11 wins by submission, Dricus Du Plessis has a good submission game. He has very good jiu-jitsu. Offensively, defensively, the problem with DDP's grappling has been dealing with very, very good wrestlers. And I know you could say, well, wait, that's just Khamzat Chimaev. It's not just Khamzat Chimaev. Because if we go back in time, one of the big reasons I was saying Dricus basically didn't stand much of a chance against Khamzat Chimaev was because if you go back and watch the Darren Till fight, right? I believe Darren Till had him in some danger on the ground. It's like, Darren Till, a striker? But this fight against Derek Brunson, for me, was all I needed to see. Derek Brunson, who, yes, at the time of me back in 2023, Derek Brunson was still pretty good. He's a very good wrestler, but he has really no submission threat whatsoever. He's got decent ground and pound, but a lot of Derek Brunson's game was just taking guys down and controlling them, and DDP was really struggling against Derek Brunson. And I know DDP, kind of the just stand-up technique, right, pulling to Derek Lewis, just kind of bench pressing Brunson off, rolling, getting back to the feet, finding a way to eventually just break Derek Brunson and get him out of there. And that's what DDP does such a good job of. He never gives up on himself, man. And for a while it was, well, DDP doesn't really have the gas tank. He doesn't have the cardio. All those answers, all those questions have been answered. We've seen him go 25 minutes multiple times now. And he's a guy that even when fatigued, he will find a way to fight through it. And we saw that in this fight. Things weren't looking good. He was breathing heavy. He was getting taken down and controlled by Brunson. And then he would just kind of explode, get him off of him, and then find a way to hurt him and eventually stop him and get him up out of there. Right? We saw against Robert Whittaker. He took down Robert Whittaker. Right? So offensively, Dricus Du Plessis is a good grappler, and he's got very good submission skills. We saw him take down Sean Strickland quite a few times as well. So it's not that DDP's a bad grappler. Like, that's kind of the misconception that frustrates me coming into this fight is, well, he got taken down by Khamzat Chimaev, so he's a bad grappler. Like, Khamzat is a phenom of a grappling talent. And Dricus is a good grappler. It's just the fact of, to me, I've been saying this for a while, when you're big, when you're strong, when you have this physically imposing style, sometimes guys don't necessarily develop the proper mechanics in certain areas, especially when it comes to the grappling, because they just kind of explode to get out of positions, which is what you saw Dricus doing against Derek Brunson. He's like, I'm in a bad spot. I'm just going to utilize my strength to push him off me and get back to space. But now DDP ran into a guy who's very strong in Khamzat, but also has the technique, and that's where DDP was screwed. He wasn't sprawling. His reactions were a little bit late. He wasn't trying to grab the whizzer. He wasn't doing those technical things that you have to be able to do. Strength won't save you against a strong technical grappler. And I feel like that's what DDP found out against Khamzat Chimaev. Right, but we saw in the Strickland fight. This one was very close. I thought Strickland won, but it was very close either way. Right, we saw him go out there. Adesanya was having a lot of success. Izzy looked good in this fight, was ripping to the body. Eventually, he was able to sting him, find the back, and submit him. You saw the submission skills. I mean, how hard is that to submit Adesanya? Not something we've really seen. Going out there in the rematch, Strickland was doing great with the jab and the front kicks. DDP shut him down completely in the rematch. And that's the thing about Dricus that has me very, very encouraged coming into this fight, as we've seen. I know him and his coach, Mornay Visser, they were making excuses. It rubbed me the wrong way. The way that they approached the Chimaev fight. Oh, we didn't practice the crucifix and all those things. But what I can say about DDP and his coach, Mornay Visser, from what we've seen so far, if there's a hole in Dricus's game or there is some sort of problem, they go back to the drawing board and they find a way to try to correct it. Because look at the difference from fight 1 to fight 2 against Strickland. I know you could say, well, Strickland was compromised in the rematch, but look at how he solved the jab. Look at how DDP fought so much more methodical than what he did in the first fight. He got eaten alive by the Strickland jab in the first fight. But then the second fight, not so much. And like I said, Strickland to me has the best jab in the sport, and that's, I feel like, a good guy to be in there with to get you ready for someone like Usman. You've been in there with Khamzat, who's got good wrestling. You've been in there with Derek Brunson, who's got good wrestling. And then you take the jab of Sean Strickland. I don't think it's as good, but you take the jab and the grappling skills. That's what Kamaru brings to the table here. And like I said, it wasn't pretty against Chimaev. And I feel like some of it was DDP and his team were buying into those narratives that it felt like was kind of flying around the MMA world, right? It was, well, Khamzat early or DDP late. And I feel like Dricus kind of, the game was, let's just survive early. Let's survive early. Khamzat will get tired, and then in the third, fourth, and fifth, I'll take over and find a way to get him out of there, or I'll outscore him. But the problem was DDP didn't make Khamzat work. He did not make him work, like how Sean Strickland made Khamzat Chimaev work, which is why I figured Strickland would be a much tougher fight for Khamzat than DDP, because Strickland was not going to accept bottom. He was going to get to the knees. He was going to build back up to the feet, right? Where DDP was not doing any of that. He looked clueless on the ground. So he's going to have an answer. I believe Dricus Du Plessis, in the time away, has made improvements. I absolutely believe that he's made improvements. Now, will it be enough? That's what's going to be interesting, and we're going to find out Saturday night, brother. The beautiful thing, right? I like how Max Holloway just repeats that over and over and over again. We don't know what to say. We're going to find out Saturday night, brother. We get to find out Saturday night. But I feel like DDP in this fight, the big thing is just keep this fight on the feet. If DDP keeps this fight on the feet and this is a striking battle for 25 minutes, I feel like it's his fight to lose. Even though Usman does have good technical boxing, at least with the straight punches, he's not very good defensively. Holds kind of the high guard, shells up a little bit, just kind of moves away, ducks his head. There's going to be times where DDP can throw those knees and uppercuts up the middle. We saw Joaquin Buckley doing a great job with the uppercuts. We saw Leon Edwards throwing those knees up the middle that were landing on the dome of Kamaru Usman. So for me, Dricus, a kick-heavy game plan. Now, granted, you got to be careful doing that, because if you're ripping kicks to the body and even throwing to the leg, Usman does a very good job of catching those. And then if you're taken down out in space, out in the open, that's where Kamaru can get to a takedown, put you on your back, and it's going to be a little bit harder to try to work your way back to the feet. We saw Dricus kind of struggle a little bit out in space. But like I've said before, I think Kamaru is a very, very good wrestler, but at this point in his career, I know what he did to Buckley was impressive. I don't think he can replicate the same kind of game as Khamzat. Not for 25 minutes. I don't think so. And I don't think he has the level of control that Chimaev does, because Khamzat has the submission threat, which I believe was an element for DDP not rushing back to the feet. I believe that there was that element of DDP like, man, I got to be worried about getting back up to my feet here. I got to worry about building myself back up, because we know Khamzat has very, very good submission skills where Kamaru doesn't necessarily. But kicking the legs of Usman. Usman had a very hard time against Leon Edwards with the leg kicks. Kicking the legs. And then eventually when he starts to reach, boom, that opens up the shots to the body. That opens up the high kick upstairs that we saw Leon use, right? I would imagine Dricus Du Plessis hopefully is drilling a 1-2 high kick out of the southpaw stance. We know that Dricus switches stances, right? Go into the body of Kamaru Usman, mixing up the targets, butcher the legs of Usman. Because if you could take away Kamaru's base and especially damage up the lead leg, it's going to make it a lot harder for him to shoot in on these takedowns. And I think if DDP can make this a one-dimensional fight, he can start to kind of wear on Kamaru, discourage him, right, by defending some of these takedowns, or even if he does get taken down, work back up to the feet pretty quickly, because he doesn't necessarily have to worry about being submitted. And I will say Kamaru, I think, has better ground and pound than Khamzat. But when you're throwing that ground and pound, that's going to give DDP opportunities to try to move, bump, sweep, and try to create that space to work back to the feet. So for me, Dricus Du Plessis, I think he has a strength advantage. I don't think he has a technicality advantage in the grappling defensively against Kamaru Usman. But if DDP can find a way to put a wrestler and Usman on his back, or in an uncomfortable position that we really don't see Kamaru in when it comes to the grappling, like, DDP has submission skills, man. He took Khamzat's back late in the fight. And we've seen, even when it's looking ugly in a DDP fight, which a lot of the time it does, he's charging in, flying piano this, slipping on a banana peel, catching the rollerblades, right? It looks like Mario Kart out there. But he's dangerous. He has power in his hands, power in his kicks. I know he's not like a super technical, methodical guy where he's just jabbing and moving, throwing a right hand, jabbing and moving. But we have seen DDP, when he can sting you, he does a good job of going to the body. We saw him do it against Robert Whittaker. I feel like this is a 3 levels type of fight for DDP. Stop the takedowns, bang up the legs of Usman, rip shots to the body to take wind out of the sail, and set up those shots upstairs. Don't just headhunt, because if you do that and you're blitzing into range and you're charging forward and your hips are there on a platter, that's just going to help Kamaru get to the takedowns. It just is. And we've seen Kamaru take down some slick, anti-grapplers like Masvidal. Masvidal historically had really good takedown defense. And we saw Kamaru, when Masvidal can blitz it in, he'd duck underneath, boom, and put him on his back. And then as that starts to happen, it starts to drain the gas tank of Usman. But I think it also drains the gas tank of DDP. So this is a fascinating matchup to me. You have the jab and the straight punches of Kamaru Usman, backed by all that championship experience, moving up to 185 here. I feel like him not draining himself as much, cutting down to 170. We're liable to see the best version of Usman that we've seen in a while. And I know that that's crazy to say because he's almost 40, right? So is it likely that this is the best Usman we've ever seen? Most likely not. But I definitely think he could look better even than what we saw in the Buckley fight, which is kind of a scary thought because if he does, I think he wins the fight. But the reality is I find myself leaning in the direction of DDP to win this fight because of the reasons that I kind of gave you when breaking down Dricus in his game, is the fact that him and his coach Mornay Fisser, they were kind of talking and making a bunch of excuses after losing to Khamzat, but I just feel like they had a bad approach, and he was just out-techniqued in that fight. He just was. I feel like a lot of that was banking on Khamzat, gassing out, and when that didn't happen, they're like, crap, what do we do now? Right, which was part of it. And obviously, the technical side of things defensively for DDP in the wrestling, it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. But with the fact that Usman does have some ground and pound skills, when you're throwing those shots and you're not prioritizing that control, that can give guys an opportunity on bottom to move, to try to create some opportunities to work back to the feet. Considering that Usman doesn't have a great submission threat, we've seen a lot of guys be able to quickly get back to the feet. I expect Dricus to come in better prepared. I expect in the time away that they've been working on the takedown defense, working back to the feet, working on sprawling, and making things happen when guys are shooting in on them, and not just going to the ground and then trying to bench press them off to get back to the feet, because that's also very taxing on the side of DDP, trying to always explode with little technique back to the feet. So for me, I think Dricus Du Plessis is going to win this fight, and I think he gets it done by a competitive decision. I think early on, Kamaru is going to be running DDP into the jab. Right, I think that Kamaru's jab is really good. I think he's going to be mixing up the levels. He's going to be angling off, firing the right hand of the body to eventually step in and try to land a big right hand. I could definitely see Kamaru clipping DDP with a big shot, but we know both of these guys are really, really durable. Outside of Edwards landing the head kick on Usman, it's not often we see Usman hurt, right? But the other thing was we saw Burns landing some big overhands on Usman. We saw Leon Edwards landing some really good shots in close on Usman, and especially Buckley later in the fight. And to me, DDP is almost in a way maybe not as technical with the boxing, and obviously I think Buckley's faster, but I think you could take some similarities from their game. That darting, blitzing in, kind of charging into range, throwing these big power shots. DDP's going to have a ton of power in his hands. His kicks are lightning fast, man. From going back and watching, DDP's fights against Strickland, preparing for this, his kicks are fast. Rips him well to the legs, to the body, brings him upstairs. He's got a good question mark kick, can switch stances, can give Usman different looks. If he's going southpaw, it's going to be a little bit easier for Usman to reach for that lead leg. So it'll be curious to see kind of what DDP does with the stances. It's going to be an interesting fight, man. This is a good X's and O's battle here because you got Kamaru with all the experience in the world, championship level experience. He's been in there with all kinds of different styles of fighter. We've seen DDP in there with all kinds of different styles of fighter. And outside of losing to Khamzat Chimaev, we've seen DDP in there with all kinds of different opponents, man. We've seen him in there with a Brad Tavares, a Darren Till, a sniper southpaw, Derek Brunson, a wrestler, Robert Whittaker, a very well-rounded fighter, just had a great win over Nikita Krylov, right? We've seen him in there with Strickland, Izzy, Chimaev. So we've seen many different styles. Both of these guys are great fighters. I think it's going to be a competitive fight, but I find myself leaning towards the younger fighter in Dricus Du Plessis, who I think has a chip on his shoulder coming into this fight. I feel like he kind of is taking it personal in a way, saying, man, Kamaru thinks I'm easy work. He thinks that he's just going to come up here and out-wrestle me and hold me down for 25 minutes and win a decision like what Khamzat did. No. I made some adjustments. I fixed that hole in my game, or at least patched it up a little bit to be serviceable enough to come out here and put on a statement to put myself back in title conversations after going out here and beating a legend of the sport and one of the greatest welterweights of all time. There's a lot for Usman to get done here. If he could beat DDP, find himself in a rematch with Strickland for the belt, right? Fighting Khamzat Chimaev again. And if DDP can take out Usman, obviously a great name to add to the resume, but he puts himself right back at the top of this weight class. This is a big fight. I'm excited for it. I'll be curious to hear who you guys think gets this one done down in the comments. You riding with DDP or Usman in this fight? I think it's a great matchup.